Hello there, and welcome to Midnight Geography. Tonight we'll drift into North America. North America is time made visible in stone and ice, a continent that breathes with the seasons and remembers in layers. It's where the planet experiments with extremes, testing how hot a desert can burn, how deep ice can accumulate, how high mountains can reach before gravity calls them home. This landmass holds conversations between epochs, where young volcanic peaks argue with ancient basement rocks about the nature of permanence. If you enjoy these peaceful geographical explorations, consider liking and subscribing. It helps other curious minds find their way here too. But for now, let's begin. The Burgess Shale in British Columbia holds one of Earth's most extraordinary secrets. Here, in these layered rocks high in the Canadian Rockies, creatures from 508 million years ago lie preserved in such detail that scientists can see their last meals, their final movements, even the soft tissues that should have vanished into time. These aren't just fossils, they're photographs in stone, capturing a moment when life was experimenting with forms that seem almost alien today. Five-eyed Opabinia, Hallucigenia walking on stilts, Anomalocaris with its grasping arms, creatures that nature tried once and never again. The mud that entombed them fell so gently, so perfectly, that even their internal organs remain visible. It's as if the mountain opened a window into the Cambrian seas, preserving not just bones and shells but the very essence of ancient life, waiting 500 million years for human eyes to witness what Earth imagined in its youth. Just south in Montana, Glacier National Park reveals even older stories. The rocks here reach back 1.5 billion years, some of the oldest exposed sedimentary layers in North America. You can still see the ripple marks from ancient seas, frozen in stone like memories of waves that lapped shores before complex life existed. These rocks were laid down when the only living things were microscopic, when oxygen was just beginning to accumulate in the atmosphere. The stone remembers everything: ancient storms, prehistoric tides, the slow accumulation of sand grain by grain over millions of years. What strikes visitors most is how ordinary these rocks appear until you know their age. You can run your fingers along ripples created by water that moved before animals existed, before plants emerged from the seas, when Earth was an alien world that would eventually become home. The Great Lakes hold more than water. They hold 21% of the planet's fresh surface water, enough liquid to cover the entire continental United States to a depth of 9.5 feet. But these lakes are more than statistics. They're seas trapped in the heart of a continent, so vast they create their own weather, generate their own storms, swallow ships whole, and keep them preserved in cold darkness for centuries. Lake Superior alone could flood all of North and South America to a depth of 1 foot. These waters remember the glaciers that carved them, still rebounding from the weight of ice that departed 10,000 years ago. In November storms, they can produce waves 30 feet high, and in winter, they manufacture lake-effect snow that buries cities. The lakes breathe with the seasons, their levels rising and falling like a sleeping giant's chest, connected by rivers and straits in an endless circulation that Native Americans called the Sweetwater Seas. Beneath Lake Superior lies a secret even more profound than its depth. The Mid-Continent Rift tells the story of when North America almost tore itself in two. About 1.1 billion years ago, the continent began to split apart, with volcanic eruptions pouring out enough lava to build a mountain range. But then, mysteriously, the rifting stopped. The failed rift, filled with lava, flows up to 20 miles thick, Imagine volcanic rock stacked higher than commercial aircraft fly. Today, this ancient wound lies buried beneath the lake, filled with copper and silver that would later draw miners to the region. The rift extends from Lake Superior all the way to Kansas, a scar that almost became an ocean. Sometimes Earth changes its mind and Lake Superior exists because a continent chose to remain whole. The waters above have no knowledge of the volcanic catastrophe below, yet they exist because of it, filling the depression left by Earth's abandoned attempt at self-division. Isle Royale floats in Lake Superior, like a thought experiment in isolation. This island, 45 miles long and 9 miles wide, hosts the world's longest-running wildlife study where scientists have watched wolves and moose since 1958. But the true wonder isn't the study. It's what the study reveals about islands and isolation. Moose arrived here in the early 1900s, probably swimming from the mainland. Wolves crossed on winter ice in the late 1940s. Since then, these two species have danced a complex ballet of predator and prey, their populations rising and falling in waves that teach us about the delicate mathematics of survival. The island is really an archipelago of over 400 smaller islands, each one a world unto itself. In recent years, the wolf population dwindled to just 2 individuals before new wolves were introduced. Every drama of survival plays out here in miniature: starvation, disease, genetic bottlenecks, all observed by scientists who arrive each year like clockwork, documenting life and death on an island that exists in its own time zone of ecological time. The Chihuahuan Desert spreads across 250,000 square miles of Mexico and the southwestern United States, but calling it a desert misses its secret identity as one of the most biologically diverse arid regions on Earth. This desert holds more species of cacti than any other, more than 350 species of birds, 3,000 species of plants. It's a desert that doesn't believe in the limitations of deserts. Rain falls here in violent monsoons that transform dry valleys into temporary rivers. The desert blooms in waves of color that seem impossible in such an austere landscape. Underground, ancient aquifers hold water from the Pleistocene, and above ground, sky islands, mountain peaks that rise from the desert floor, create vertical worlds where you can travel from desert to pine forest in a single afternoon's hike. The Chihuahuan Desert proves that diversity doesn't require abundance, that life finds its greatest creativity in limitation. Within this vast desert, New Mexico's white sands tells a story of transformation. These aren't ordinary sand dunes. They're made of pure gypsum, 275 square miles of crystal ground to powder. Gypsum usually dissolves in water, disappears into rivers and streams, but here in the Tularosa Basin, there's no outlet to the sea. Rain falls, dissolves gypsum from the surrounding mountains, carries it to Lake Lucero, and when the lake evaporates, it leaves behind crystals that the wind grinds into sand. The dunes are white because gypsum doesn't absorb heat like silica sand. You can walk barefoot here on the hottest summer days. The sand moves constantly, traveling northeast at 30 feet per year, burying and uncovering a landscape that's never the same twice. Animals here have evolved to be white lizards, white moths, white spiders, evolution responding to geology in real time. It's the world's largest gypsum dune field, a white sea in the desert that shouldn't exist but does. Carlsbad Caverns drops 1,604 feet into the earth, a vertical world of limestone dissolved by sulfuric acid rather than the usual carbonic acid that creates most caves. This unusual formation process created chambers of staggering size. The big room alone covers 14 acres, its ceiling arching 255 feet overhead. You could fit 14 football fields in this single chamber. The cave breathes, literally. Air pressure differences cause it to exhale in the morning and inhale in the evening, a rhythm detected by early explorers who followed the wind into darkness. Every evening from spring to fall, 400,000 Mexican free-tailed bats spiral out of the entrance in a living tornado that can be seen on weather radar. The cave continues far beyond what tourists see. Over 30 miles of passages have been mapped, with new rooms still being discovered. In the deepest sections, the temperature stays at exactly 56 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, a constant that hasn't varied in recorded history. Above ground in Colorado, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains stretch for 240 miles, containing over 1,500 peaks above 10,000 feet. The name means blood of Christ, given by Spanish explorers who watched these peaks turn red at sunset. But there's another kind of red here, watermelon snow, tinted pink by microscopic algae that thrive in snowfields. These algae, Chlamydomonas nivalis, produce a red pigment to protect themselves from intense high-altitude UV radiation. When you walk through these pink snowfields, you're walking through billions of tiny plants that have figured out how to photosynthesize in near-freezing conditions. The mountains are still growing, pushed up by tectonic forces at a rate invisible to human perception, but relentless over geological time. Ancient seafloor rocks sit at 14,000 feet, carrying fossils of creatures that lived when this was the bottom of an ocean. The Sangre de Cristos prove that even the seafloor can touch the sky, given enough time. Colorado's San Luis Valley cradles an impossibility. The Great Sand Dunes, North America's tallest at 750 feet, containing 5 billion cubic meters of sand in a valley surrounded by snow-capped peaks. The sand comes from the San Juan Mountains, carried by the Rio Grande and its tributaries over 440,000 years. But rivers don't build dunes, wind does. The valley's peculiar wind patterns, with southwesterlies meeting northeasterlies, have piled the sand against the Sangre de Cristo Mountains like snow against a fence. The dunes sing when conditions are right, a low humming caused by sand grains tumbling in unison. Medano Creek flows at their base, but not like a normal stream. It flows in waves, surges of water created by sand dams that build and break in a rhythm that pulses through the summer. Beneath the dunes lies an aquifer, water trapped between sand grains, creating wetlands that shouldn't exist beside a desert of sand. It's a landscape that defies categories, neither desert nor mountain, but something between. Death Valley simmers in superlatives, hottest, driest, lowest. But beneath its hostile surface flows water that fell as rain 10,000 years ago. This ancient aquifer system moves through the valley's subsurface, emerging in springs that create oases of pupfish found nowhere else on Earth. These fish, isolated in separate springs, have evolved into distinct species in just thousands of years, evolution operating at breakneck speed. The valley records the planet's highest reliably measured temperature, 134 degrees Fahrenheit, yet in winter, snow dusts the surrounding peaks. The valley is a graben, a block of Earth's crust that dropped between parallel faults, sinking as the mountains around it rose. It continues to sink today, the floor dropping while the mountains climb, increasing the relief between peak and valley floor. The rocks here span almost the entire history of Earth, from 1.8 billion-year-old basement rocks to recent volcanic eruptions. Death Valley is a place of extremes because it's a place of active geology, still being shaped by the forces that tear continents apart. Badwater Basin marks the lowest point in North America at 282 feet below sea level. Yet from this salt-crusted depression, you can see Mount Whitney, the highest peak in the contiguous United States, just 85 miles away. This proximity of extremes exists nowhere else on the continent. The basin is covered with salt polygons, geometric patterns created by the expansion and contraction of salt crystals, with temperature changes. After rare rains, the basin becomes a shallow lake reflecting the mountains in perfect symmetry, but the water quickly evaporates, leaving fresh salt deposits. The salt here is mostly sodium chloride, but also contains borax, gypsum, and other minerals that create subtle colors in the white expanse. Standing in Badwater, you're standing where an ancient lake evaporated repeatedly over millions of years, each cycle adding another layer to salt deposits that extend 1,000 feet below the surface. The basin is still evaporating, still accumulating salt, a process that started 3 million years ago and continues today. The San Andreas Fault slips constantly, moving about 2 inches per year, carrying Los Angeles northward toward San Francisco at the same rate your fingernails grow. This might seem slow, but geologically, it's breakneck speed. In 20 million years, Los Angeles will be a suburb of San Francisco. The fault is not a single crack, but a complex zone of fractures extending 800 miles through California. It marks where the Pacific Plate grinds past the North American Plate, 2 massive sections of Earth's crust sliding past each other in opposite directions. The fault has created California's Central Valley, lifted the Coast Ranges, and continues reshaping the state's geography. Along its length, you can find stream channels offset by hundreds of feet, ancient features cut in half by the fault's movement. At Wallace Creek, you can stand where the creek has been offset 430 feet in just 3,700 years. The San Andreas makes geology visible, turns the abstract concept of plate tectonics into something you can see, touch, and measure. Crater Lake fills a caldera created 7,700 years ago when Mount Mazama exploded in an eruption 42 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens. The mountain collapsed into its emptied magma chamber, creating a bowl that gradually filled with rain and snow. No rivers feed the lake, no streams drain it. Its water comes only from precipitation and leaves only through evaporation and seepage. This isolation has created some of the purest water on Earth, so clear that visibility extends 142 feet down. The lake maintains a nearly constant level, precipitation and evaporation balanced so precisely that the level varies by only 3 feet between wet and dry years. At 1,943 feet, it's the deepest lake in the United States. The water's clarity creates its famous blue color, sunlight penetrating deep into the water with longer wavelengths absorbed and blue wavelengths scattered back. Wizard Island rises from the lake, a cinder cone that erupted after the caldera formed, an island that's really a volcano within a volcano. The Columbia River Gorge slices through the Cascade Mountains for 80 miles, its walls rising up to 4,000 feet, creating a sea-level passage through a mountain range. The gorge exists because the river is older than the mountains. As the Cascades rose, the Columbia cut down at the same rate, maintaining its course like a saw blade through rising wood. This created not just a canyon, but a wind tunnel, the only sea level break in the mountain chain from California to Canada. Wind funnels through the gorge with such force that it reverses the current in tributaries, creates standing waves on the river, and powers one of the world's premier windsurfing destinations. The gorge walls display the geological history of the region, layer after layer of basalt from ancient lava flows, some 400 feet thick, stacked like a chronology of volcanic catastrophes. Waterfalls pour from the cliff tops, fed by springs emerging from between lava layers. The gorge creates its own weather system, trapping clouds on the western side while the eastern side bakes in desert sun. Mount St. Helens lost 1,314 feet of elevation in a single day, May 18, 1980, transforming from a perfect volcanic cone to a hollowed amphitheater in minutes. The eruption began with the largest landslide in recorded history. The entire north face of the mountain collapsed, releasing pressure on the magma below. The lateral blast that followed leveled forests 17 miles away, the shock wave traveling at 670 miles per hour. In 9 hours, the mountain ejected 540 million tons of ash, distributing it across 11 states. But what makes Mount St. Helens remarkable isn't just the destruction, it's the recovery. Life returned faster than anyone predicted. Pocket gophers survived underground, bringing nutrient-rich soil to the surface. Plants sprouted from buried seeds. Elk returned within years. The blast zone has become a living laboratory of ecological succession, showing how life reclaims devastated land. Inside the crater, a new lava dome grows, already 1,000 feet tall, the mountain slowly rebuilding itself for the next eruption. The Olympic Peninsula's Hoh rainforest receives 140 inches of rain annually, creating the only temperate rainforest in the continental United States. This isn't tropical abundance, but something quieter, older, a forest draped in moss, where 300-foot Sitka spruces and Douglas firs create a canopy so dense that some rain never reaches the ground, caught and recycled in the crowns of trees. Every surface is colonized by something else: moss on bark, ferns on moss, lichens on ferns, layers of life upon life. Nurse logs, fallen giants that become gardens for the next generation, create colonnades of trees standing on stilts where their nurse logs have rotted away. The forest floor is a sponge 3 feet deep, centuries of needles and leaves creating soil so rich it seems to breathe. Roosevelt elk move through the understory like shadows, and the Hoh River runs gray with glacial flour from the Olympic's peaks. This forest exists because mountains force Pacific storms to drop their moisture, creating a strip of rainforest between ocean and peaks. Alaska's Tongass National Forest spans 17 million acres, larger than West Virginia, the largest intact temperate rainforest remaining on Earth. The forest stretches 500 miles from north to south, encompassing islands, fjords, glaciers, and mountains in a wilderness so vast that there are valleys no human has ever entered. Trees here can be 800 years old, their growth rings recording centuries of storms, droughts, and volcanic winters. The forest stores more carbon per acre than any other forest type, the trees and soil holding carbon that would otherwise warm the atmosphere. Brown bears achieve the highest density anywhere here, feeding on salmon runs so massive that streams turn red with fish. The forest produces 70 million pounds of salmon annually, fish that die and decay, their bodies bringing ocean nutrients miles inland, feeding trees that might never otherwise taste the sea. It's a forest built on fish, where ocean and land merge in ways that defy simple categories. Denali rises 18,000 feet from base to summit, a greater vertical rise than Mount Everest when measured from its base on the Tibetan Plateau. This massive granite pluton, pushed up by tectonic forces and carved by glaciers, creates its own weather, often disappearing in clouds it generates. The mountain is so massive it's visible from 200 miles away on clear days, appearing to float above the horizon like something from another world. Temperatures on the summit can reach -75 degrees Fahrenheit, with winds exceeding 150 miles per hour. The mountain is still rising, pushed up by the ongoing collision of tectonic plates at about 1 millimeter per year. Glaciers flow from its flanks, rivers of ice moving imperceptibly, carrying rocks from the summit to the valleys below. The native Athabascan name, Denali, means the Great One. And standing before it, you understand why. It's not just tall, but massive, a presence that dominates not just the skyline, but the imagination. The Aleutian Islands arc 200 miles from Alaska toward Russia, a chain of volcanic islands that crosses the international dateline, making the westernmost point of North America, technically in the Eastern Hemisphere. These islands mark where the Pacific Plate plunges beneath the North American Plate, creating a chain of 57 volcanoes, many still active. The islands exist in a state of constant creation and destruction, new volcanic material adding to them while storms and tsunamis tear them apart. Weather here is legendary. Storms can generate 100-foot waves, winds can exceed 100 miles per hour, and fog can last for weeks. The islands were once connected during ice ages when sea levels were lower, forming a bridge that allowed humans to first enter the Americas. Today, they're home to millions of seabirds, the nutrient-rich waters supporting one of the most productive marine ecosystems on Earth. The islands prove that land can exist at the edge of possibility, where ocean and geology wage constant war. Reprova F. Continuing the sleep-inducing geography documentary. Maintain the same contemplative voice. Continue with facts 21 to 40 from the outline. For each fact should be 150-250 words, never less than 150, can extend to 250 for complex topics. Start directly with the location phenomenon, include surprising details, focus on wonder and imagery rather than precise data. Keep the voice contemplative and soothing throughout. Flow naturally to next fact when connections arise. No numbering or headers. Flow naturally between facts when possible. No numbering or headers. Never repeat locations already covered. Orchestrated expansion of 20 geographic facts into contemplative narrative passages. H. 12:29s. Looking at facts 2140 from the outline. Fact 21. Canada's Hudson Bay has gravity slightly lower than the rest of Earth due to the lingering depression from ice sheets that melted 10,000 years ago. Fact 22. The Bay of Fundy between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick experiences the world's highest tides, with water levels changing by up to 56 feet twice daily. Fact 23. Newfoundland's Gros-Morne National Park exposes rock from Earth's mantle, pushed to the surface 485 million years ago, one of the few places where you can walk on the planet's interior. Fact 24. The Manicouagan crater in Quebec, formed by an asteroid impact 214 million years ago, is now a ring-shaped lake, 70 kilometers across, visible from space. Fact 25. Quebec's Pingualuit crater contains some of the purest water on Earth, with visibility extending 35 meters down, formed by a meteorite impact 1.4 million years ago. Fact 26. The Canadian Shield covers 8 million square kilometers and contains rocks up to 4.28 billion years old, some of the oldest on Earth. Fact 27. Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba is the 11th largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area, yet averages only 12 meters deep. Fact 28. The Athabasca Sand Dunes in Saskatchewan stretch for 100 kilometers along Lake Athabasca, the most northerly active sand dunes in the world. Fact 29. Wood Buffalo National Park, straddling Alberta and the Northwest Territories, is larger than Switzerland and contains the world's largest beaver dam, visible from space at 850 meters long. Fact 30. The Nahanni River in the Northwest Territories drops 90 meters over Virginia Falls, twice the height of Niagara Falls. Fact 31. Ellesmere Island in Nunavut contains ice shelves 4,500 years old and experiences 4 months of total darkness, followed by 4 months of continuous daylight. Fact 32. Alert, Nunavut, sits at the extreme northern edge of our planet, being the northernmost permanently inhabited location, just 508 miles from the North Pole. Fact 33. The massive ice sheet covering Greenland holds such immense potential that its complete melting would cause a dramatic 24-foot rise in global sea levels. Fact 34. The Grand Canyon reveals an incredible geological timeline with rock layers showcasing 2 billion years of Earth's complex history. Fact 35. Antelope Canyon's dramatic landscape emerged through powerful flash flood processes, carving incredibly narrow passages where human movement becomes severely restricted. Fact 36. The unique Sonoran Desert ecosystem exclusively nurtures saguaro cacti, with some remarkable specimens surviving over 2 centuries and reaching massive weights up to 6 tons. Fact 37. Chihuahua's Cave of Crystals houses extraordinary selenite formations, featuring crystals that stretch an astonishing 39 feet and weigh 55 tons, the largest natural crystals ever documented. Fact 38. Mexico's Copper Canyon system dwarfs the Grand Canyon, spanning 4 times its size and plunging to extraordinary depths exceeding 6,000 feet. Fact 39. Mexico City rests precariously in a high-altitude basin, constructed on a drained lake bed that continues to sink at an alarming rate of up to 20 inches annually. Fact 40. The Yucatan Peninsula's unique hydrology lacks surface rivers, instead featuring thousands of cenotes that connect to extensive underground cave networks. Hudson Bay holds a secret written in gravity itself. Here, gravity is measurably weaker than anywhere else on Earth, a lingering effect of ice sheets 2 miles thick that pressed down on this land for 100,000 years. When the ice melted 10,000 years ago, it left more than just carved landscapes. It left a depression in the Earth's crust that hasn't fully rebounded. The land is still rising, still recovering from the weight of ancient ice, lifting at about half an inch per year. Scientists call this post-glacial rebound, but it's really the Earth breathing out after holding its breath for millennia. The missing gravity, just a tiny fraction weaker than normal, tells the story of ice so heavy it deformed the planet itself. Ships sailing over Hudson Bay are literally sailing over a dent in the Earth, a place where the planet remembers the weight of winter that lasted longer than all of human civilization. The bay itself is shallow, averaging only 420 feet deep, a bathtub compared to the oceans, yet it influences weather patterns across the continent. Its cold waters a ghost of the ice age that created it. The Bay of Fundy performs a twice-daily magic trick with 160 billion tons of water. Between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, tides rise and fall by up to 56 feet, the highest in the world. This isn't just water moving. It's the entire Atlantic Ocean funneling into a bay shaped perfectly to amplify tides. The bay resonates with the Atlantic's tidal period like a giant liquid bell, each tide reinforcing the next. At low tide, you can walk on the ocean floor, finding boats stranded like beached whales, their hulls resting on mud that was under 50 feet of water 6 hours earlier. The returning tide advances as a wall of water, filling rivers backward, creating reversing rapids that flow uphill. The Hopewell rocks, carved by these tremendous tides, stand like flower pots on legs at low tide, then become tiny islands at high. This endless cycle has carved caves, sculpted cliffs, and created an ecosystem that lives between worlds, creatures that must survive both underwater and in air, adapting to changes that would seem impossible anywhere else. Newfoundland's Gros Morne National Park offers something extraordinary: the chance to walk on rocks from Earth's mantle, material that should be 10 miles beneath your feet. These rusty orange rocks, called peridotite, were thrust to the surface 485 million years ago, when an ancient ocean closed and continents collided. The tablelands, as this area is known, looks like Mars, a barren orange landscape where almost nothing grows because the rock contains heavy metals toxic to most plants. This is the deep earth exposed to sunlight, material from below the planet's crust that normally never sees the surface. The rocks are still chemically reacting with the atmosphere, breaking down in ways they never would in their native depth. Walking here is walking on the planet's interior architecture, the usually hidden machinery of plate tectonics laid bare. Scientists come from around the world to study these rocks, using them to understand what lies beneath every continent. It's one of the few places on Earth where you can touch the mantle without drilling a single inch, where the planet has turned itself inside out for our inspection. The Manicouagan crater in Quebec creates a perfect ring of water, 70 kilometers across, so distinctive it's used to calibrate cameras on the International Space Station. This ring-shaped lake, called the Eye of Quebec, formed 214 million years ago when an asteroid 5 kilometers wide slammed into Earth. The impact was so powerful it melted rock, creating a sheet of impact melt 200 meters thick. What makes Manicouagan unique is its preservation. Most craters this old have been erased by erosion, but the hard rocks of the Canadian Shield preserved this wound in the Earth's surface. The ring shape comes from differential erosion, softer rocks in the center and edges eroded away, leaving a circular plateau surrounded by a moat. From space, it looks like a target, as if the cosmos marked this spot for special attention. The impact happened just before the age of dinosaurs, and some scientists wonder if it contributed to the mass extinction that cleared the way for dinosaurs to dominate the Earth. Quebec's Pingualuit crater holds water purer than distilled water, clearer than air on most days. Formed 1.4 million years ago by a meteorite impact, this perfectly circular lake has no inlets or outlets. Its water comes only from rain and snow, cycles through evaporation and precipitation without ever touching another water body. The result is water so pure that visibility extends 35 meters down, water that contains almost no dissolved minerals or organic matter. The crater is so round that from the rim it looks artificial, as if engineered rather than created by cosmic violence. Local Inuit call it the crystal eye of Nunavik, and standing on its rim, you understand why. It's like looking into a lens focused on the Earth's depths. The water stays near freezing year-round, too cold and pure to support much life, a sterile jewel set in the tundra. Scientists study this lake to understand what water might be like on other worlds, using Earth's purest natural water as an analog for seas that might exist beneath the ice of Jupiter's moons. The Canadian Shield sprawls across 8 million square kilometers, a foundation of rock so old it predates complex life by billions of years. These rocks, up to 4.28 billion years old, formed when Earth was young, when the atmosphere held no oxygen, when the planet was still figuring out how to be a planet. The Shield is like Earth's basement, the stable core around which the rest of the continent assembled. Its rocks contain the planet's oldest minerals, zircon crystals that formed just 300 million years after Earth itself. This ancient foundation has been stable for so long that rivers have carved valleys 1,000 feet deep, wearing away rock grain by grain over millions of years. The Shield's lakes, hundreds of thousands of them, fill depressions carved by ice ages, creating a landscape that's more water than land in summer. Its rocks contain vast mineral wealth: gold, copper, nickel, uranium, elements forged in dying stars and assembled when Earth was molten. Walking on the Shield is walking on the planet's childhood, on rocks that remember when the moon was closer, when days were shorter, when Earth was unrecognizable. Lake Winnipeg stretches across Manitoba like an inland sea, the 11th largest freshwater lake by surface area, yet averaging only 12 meters deep. This shallow basin acts more like a river than a lake, its waters completely replacing themselves every 3 years. The lake is young in geological terms, formed only 10,000 years ago as glacial Lake Agassiz drained, leaving this remnant like a puddle after rain. Its shallowness makes it vulnerable to wind, which can whip the entire lake into 15-foot waves, dangerous walls of water in a lake you could almost walk across if it were empty. The lake breathes with the seasons, freezing solid enough to drive trucks across in winter, warming to 20 degrees Celsius in summer. Its waters support massive commercial fisheries, but the shallow depth means nutrients concentrate, creating algae blooms visible from space. The lake is slowly filling with sediment, growing shallower each year, destined to become prairie in geological time. For now, it reflects prairie skies like a mirror 436 kilometers long, a temporary feature that indigenous peoples have watched change for millennia. The Athabasca sand dunes stretch for 100 kilometers along Lake Athabasca in Saskatchewan, the most northerly active sand dunes in the world. These aren't desert dunes, but boreal dunes, sand hills rising 30 meters high in a landscape of forests and lakes. The sand came from the Canadian Shield, ground from ancient rocks by glaciers, and deposited here as ice, ages ended. What makes these dunes remarkable is that they're active. They move, shift, swallow forests, and reveal them again, despite being surrounded by wilderness that receives adequate rainfall. The dunes have created their own endemic species, plants that exist nowhere else on Earth, having evolved in this unique environment of cold climate sand. In summer, the sand can reach 40 degrees Celsius, while in winter, the same dunes lie buried under snow at -40. The dunes sing in the wind, a low humming created by sand grains sliding against each other. They're slowly marching into Lake Athabasca, the forest fighting back at their edges, a slow-motion battle between sand and vegetation that's been ongoing for 8,000 years. Wood Buffalo National Park straddles the border between Alberta and the Northwest Territories, an area larger than Switzerland, containing ecosystems found nowhere else on Earth. Within its boundaries, the world's largest beaver dam stretches 850 meters, visible from space, built continuously by generations of beavers since the 1970s. This isn't just a dam, but an engineering project that's changed the landscape, creating wetlands that didn't exist before. The park protects the last remaining nesting ground of the whooping crane, birds that came within 15 individuals of extinction, but now number in the hundreds. Bison roam here, not just any bison, but the last genetically pure wood bison, larger and darker than their plains cousins. The park contains gypsum karst formations found nowhere else in North America, caves and sinkholes in rock that shouldn't exist this far north. Salt plains stretch for miles, remnants of ancient seas where salt-tolerant plants create meadows that turn red in autumn. It's a park so vast that there are areas no human has visited in decades, where wolves and bison interact as they have for thousands of years. The Nahanni River in the Northwest Territories plunges over Virginia Falls in a display that dwarfs Niagara. At 90 meters, it's twice Niagara's height, yet so remote that fewer people have seen it than have climbed Everest. The river has carved 4 immense canyons through the Mackenzie Mountains, canyons that predate the mountains themselves. The river was here first, cutting down as the mountains rose. The area holds legends of tropical valleys heated by hot springs, of tribes of giants, of gold mines that drove men mad. What's true is strange enough. Hot springs that create pockets of warmth where orchids grow north of the 60th parallel, caves that extend for miles underground, and tufa mounds that build themselves from dissolved limestone. The river runs so remote that portions weren't properly mapped until the 1960s. In the perpetual twilight of summer nights, the falls create rainbows in the mist that last for hours, light playing through water in a place where few human eyes have witnessed it. Ellesmere Island in Nunavut exists at the edge of what's possible for land. At 82 degrees north, it experiences 4 months of total darkness followed by 4 months of continuous daylight, a place where the concept of day and night breaks down. The island contains ice shelves 4,500 years old, floating platforms of ice attached to land, older than the pyramids. These shelves are breaking apart now, 1,000-year-old ice cracking away in pieces the size of cities. The island's mountains trap snow that compresses into glaciers, rivers of ice that flow imperceptibly toward the sea. In the brief summer, Arctic poppies track the sun in its endless circle, their faces following the light around and around. Peary caribou, white as snow and smaller than their southern cousins, survive here at the limit of mammalian existence. The island holds Lake Hazen, the Arctic's largest lake by volume, kept liquid by thermal springs, despite being north of everything. It's a landscape that seems more like another planet, where normal rules don't apply, where water, ice, and stone exist in arrangements that defy expectation. Alert Nunavut perches at 82°30 N, the northernmost permanently inhabited place on Earth, just 508 miles from the North Pole. This military and research station exists in perpetual extremes: 24-hour daylight in summer, 24-hour darkness in winter, temperatures that can reach -50 degrees Celsius. The sun sets in October and doesn't rise again until March, a night that lasts longer than entire seasons elsewhere. During the polar night, only starlight and aurora illuminate the landscape, green curtains of light dancing over ice that never melts. In summer, the sun circles the horizon without setting, casting shadows that rotate full circle every day. The nearest tree is 1,500 kilometers south. The ground is permafrost, frozen solid to depths of 500 meters, ground that's been frozen since before human civilization began. Alert exists because humans insist on pushing boundaries, on inhabiting the uninhabitable. It's less a place than a statement that even here, at the top of the world, where the planet runs out of north, humans persist. Greenland holds 10% of the world's fresh water locked in ice up to 3 kilometers thick, a frozen reservoir that if melted would raise global sea levels by 24 feet. This ice sheet is so massive it depresses the bedrock beneath it, pushing the center of Greenland below sea level. The weight of ice has created a bowl, and if the ice disappeared instantly, the center of Greenland would be a sea. The ice sheet is ancient, containing ice that fell as snow over 100,000 years ago, preserving ancient atmospheres in tiny bubbles that scientists extract and study. But the ice is also dynamic, flowing toward the coasts at rates of meters per day, faster than many rivers. Crevasses open and close. Meltwater rivers course across the surface in summer, disappearing into moulins, vertical shafts that carry water to the bedrock below. The ice sheet generates its own weather, so massive it creates high pressure systems that influence weather patterns across the northern hemisphere. It's the last remnant of the ice ages, a frozen monument to a time when ice ruled the north. The Grand Canyon exposes Earth's autobiography written in stone, 2 billion years of history stacked in layers anyone can read. At the bottom, the Vishnu schist tells of ancient mountains that eroded to nothing, rocks metamorphosed by heat and pressure when life was only single cells. Above that, layer after layer, records advancing and retreating seas, deserts that buried everything in sand, swamps that became coal. The canyon is 277 river miles long, up to 18 miles wide, and over a mile deep, but these numbers don't capture its essence. It's a place where you can see deep time, where human history becomes a rounding error. The youngest rocks at the rim are 270 million years old, older than dinosaurs, older than flowers, from a time when Earth's continents were assembled into Pangaea. The Colorado River, which carved all this, is young by comparison, maybe 6 million years old, maybe less. The canyon continues to deepen by the thickness of paper each year, the river carrying away the Rockies grain by grain. Antelope Canyon winds through Navajo sandstone like a wave frozen in rock, carved by flash floods over millions of years into passages so narrow your shoulders brush both walls. Light enters from above in shafts that seem solid, illuminating dust motes that drift like stars. The canyon is properly two canyons, upper and lower, each with its own character. Upper Antelope, called the place where water runs through rocks, floods less frequently, but when it does, a wall of water 30 feet high can race through in seconds. The walls have been polished by countless floods into flowing shapes that seem organic rather than geological. Colors shift from purple to orange to pink as the sun moves overhead, the rock itself seeming to glow. These slot canyons exist only in a few places on Earth, requiring exactly the right combination of rock type, climate, and time. In some sections, the passage narrows to less than 2 feet, forcing you to turn sideways and shuffle through darkness toward the light ahead. The Sonoran Desert hosts the saguaro cactus, a plant that exists wild nowhere else on Earth, growing into living monuments that define this landscape. These giants start life no bigger than a pinhead, spending their first decade reaching only inches tall, hidden under nurse plants that protect them from sun and frost. But given time, and they can live 200 years, they become colossi, reaching 40 feet tall and weighing 6 tons, 90% of which is water. A mature saguaro might have 50 arms, each one starting to grow only after the plant is 75 years old. They bloom at night with white flowers that smell like overripe melons, pollinated by bats that navigate by echolocation in the darkness. After rain, a large saguaro can absorb 200 gallons of water in a single day, its pleated skin expanding like an accordion. When they die, their wooden ribs stand like bones in the desert, architectural remains that can last decades. The saguaro has become more than a plant. It's become the desert's symbol, a reminder that life finds ways to be magnificent even in the harshest places. Mexico's Cave of Crystals in Chihuahua holds formations that challenge belief. Selenite crystals up to 39 feet long and weighing 55 tons, the largest natural crystals ever discovered. The cave stayed flooded with mineral-rich water at exactly 58 degrees Celsius for 500,000 years, the perfect conditions for growing crystals of impossible size. The chamber looks like Superman's fortress of solitude made real, beams of translucent gypsum crossing in all directions. Without protective gear, humans can only survive 10 minutes in the cave's heat and humidity. The crystals grew so slowly, perhaps 1/1,000,000th of a meter per year, that they achieved perfection, their surfaces smooth as glass, their geometry precise. Discovered only in 2000 by miners drilling for lead and silver, the cave reminds us that Earth holds wonders we haven't imagined. Now drained of water, the crystals have stopped growing, beginning their slow deterioration. The cave is a momentary revelation, a glimpse into Earth's capacity for creating beauty in darkness, in conditions that would kill us, in timescales we can barely comprehend. The Copper Canyon system in Mexico's Sierra Madre Occidental dwarfs the Grand Canyon in scale if not fame, a network of 6 major canyons covering 25,000 square miles. Some portions plunge more than 6,000 feet, deeper than the Grand Canyon, with a climate that ranges from alpine at the rim to subtropical at the bottom. The canyons formed differently than the Grand Canyon, not carved by a single river, but by a network of rivers that found faults in volcanic rock and carved along zones of weakness. The Tarahumara people have lived in these canyons for centuries, developing a culture of long-distance running in the steep terrain, able to run hundreds of miles without rest. The canyon system is so vast and rugged that there are valleys that have never been fully explored, where pre-Columbian ruins wait undiscovered. In the depths, tropical birds share space with pine trees, a vertical journey through climate zones that would normally require traveling thousands of miles north or south. Mexico City demonstrates what happens when you build a megalopolis on a drained lakebed. It sinks up to 20 inches per year in some neighborhoods. The city sits at 7,182 feet elevation in a closed basin that was once a system of lakes. The Aztecs built Tenochtitlan on an island in Lake Texcoco, connected to shore by causeways. When the Spanish conquered the city, they began draining the lakes, a process that took centuries. Now, as the city pumps groundwater from the ancient lake bed, the clay soil compresses and the city descends. The Metropolitan Cathedral has sunk so unevenly that engineers have had to excavate beneath parts of it to keep it from toppling. Some areas have dropped 30 feet since the early 1900s. The sinking is visible in everyday life. Steps that once led down to the subway now lead up. Ground floors have become basements. Yet the city continues to grow. 21 million people living on unstable ground, a modern metropolis slowly returning to the lakebed from which it arose. The Yucatan Peninsula keeps its water hidden underground, flowing through a vast network of caves and cenotes instead of surface rivers. These cenotes, sinkholes that connect to underwater cave systems, number in the thousands, each one a window into an underground world. The peninsula is made of limestone, rock that dissolves in slightly acidic rainwater, creating caves that eventually collapse, forming the cenotes. The ancient Maya considered them sacred, gateways to the underworld, and threw offerings and sacrifices into their depths. Today, cave divers have mapped hundreds of miles of underwater passages, finding human remains thousands of years old, perfectly preserved in the clear, mineral-rich water. Some cenotes connect to the ocean, creating haloclines where fresh water floats on salt water, the boundary visible as a shimmering layer. The water in these systems is so clear that underwater visibility can exceed 300 feet, creating an ethereal world where stalactites and stalagmites that formed when the caves were dry now hang in crystal-clear water, forests of stone in an underwater sky. Sistema Sac Acton stretches beneath Mexico's Yucatan jungle for 369 kilometers, the longest underwater cave system in the world, a river of darkness flowing through limestone. Discovered only through decades of dangerous cave diving, this system connects dozens of cenotes in a labyrinth that may never be fully mapped. Divers swimming through these passages move through rooms the size of cathedrals, squeezed through restrictions barely wide enough for a human body, all in water so clear it seems like flying rather than swimming. The caves preserve history in layers, Pleistocene animal bones on the bottom, Maya artifacts above them, modern debris at the surface. In some chambers, stalactites that formed when the caves were dry during ice ages now hang underwater like chandeliers in a drowned ballroom. The water maintains a constant 77 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, flowing so slowly it seems still, yet it moves, part of a circulation that connects the jungle to the Caribbean Sea. Cave divers have found bell chambers where pockets of air, trapped for who knows how long, allow them to surface miles from the nearest opening to sky. Lake Texcoco once dominated the Valley of Mexico, 5 interconnected lakes covering 2,100 square kilometers where Mexico City now sprawls. During the Aztec period, this was a landscape of water and floating gardens, causeways and canals, a Venice of the Americas. The lakes were shallow but extensive, their surfaces broken by islands where cities rose. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, sat on one such island, connected to shore by causeways that could be broken to isolate the city from attack. The Spanish began draining the lakes almost immediately after conquest, a project that took 3 centuries to complete. Now only remnants remain. Xochimilco with its ancient canals, small wetlands where migrating birds still remember what was. The lakebed clay, compressed by the weight of the modern city, still holds moisture, still remembers being underwater. Sometimes during earthquakes, this ancient lakebed liquefies, behaving like water again, buildings sinking into ground that forgets, for a moment, that it's supposed to be solid. The ghosts of lakes haunt Mexico City in its subsidence, in its floods, in the way water always seems to be trying to reclaim what was taken. The Ring of Fire traces Central America's spine with 37 active volcanoes across just 2,500 kilometers, a concentration of volcanic power found nowhere else at this latitude. From Guatemala to Panama, these peaks rise from tropical lowlands, their summits often hidden in clouds, their slopes growing coffee and soil enriched by ancient eruptions. Some, like Guatemala's Fuego, erupt almost constantly, a rumbling presence in daily life. Others sleep for centuries before awakening with devastating force. The volcanoes exist because the Cocos Plate plunges beneath the Caribbean Plate here, melting as it descends, creating magma that rises through weaknesses in the crust. Each volcano has its own personality. Arenal in Costa Rica was perfectly conical until 1968, when it exploded without warning. Masaya in Nicaragua contains a lava lake that indigenous peoples called the mouth of hell. These volcanoes don't just destroy, they create some of the richest soil on Earth, support cloud forests found nowhere else, generate geothermal energy that powers cities. They're reminders that Central America exists because of fire, built by eruptions, shaped by ash and lava into the bridge between continents. Lake Atitlan in Guatemala fills a caldera that collapsed 84,000 years ago in an eruption that scattered ash as far as Florida. The lake, reaching depths of 1,120 feet, is surrounded by 3 younger volcanoes that rise directly from its shores, their reflections doubling them in water so clear you can see 65 feet down. The lake has no visible outlet, its level controlled by underground seepage and evaporation, creating a closed system that concentrates minerals, giving the water its deep blue color. The Maya considered it the navel of the world, and at sunrise, when mist rises from the water and the volcanoes catch first light, you understand why. The lake's depth creates its own microclimate, winds that rise in late morning so predictably that locals call it Zocamil, the wind that carries away sin. Villages around the shore, each with its own Maya language, its own traditional dress, seem frozen in different centuries. The lake is rising now, has been since the 1970s, slowly drowning lakeside buildings, trees standing dead in water that once was land. No one knows exactly why. Perhaps earthquake-triggered changes in underground drainage, perhaps climate change, the lake keeping its secrets beneath that perfect blue surface. Costa Rica contains 5% of the world's biodiversity in just 0.03% of Earth's surface, a concentration of life that defies mathematical probability. This narrow country, squeezed between oceans and crossed by mountain chains, creates countless microclimates where evolution has run wild. Cloud forests where trees drip constantly, dry forests that lose their leaves, rainforests where it rains 300 days a year, paramo above tree line where giant rosette plants survive frost, all within a country smaller than West Virginia. The mountains create barriers that isolate populations, turning Costa Rica into an evolutionary laboratory where new species develop in valleys just miles apart. Poison dart frogs here come in 28 different color patterns, each valley having its own design. The country sits where North American and South American fauna meet and mingle, where the Great American Interchange continues to play out. Sloths that evolved in South America hang beside monkeys from the north, while plants from both continents hybridize into forms seen nowhere else. It's a country that proves size doesn't determine diversity, that life's richness comes from complexity of conditions rather than extent of space. The Panama Canal watershed does double duty unique in human engineering, providing drinking water for half of Panama's population, while simultaneously operating one of the world's most important shipping channels. Every ship that passes through the canal uses 52 million gallons of fresh water, water that flows from protected rainforests into Gatun and Alajuela lakes. These artificial lakes, created by damming rivers, provide the water that lifts ships 85 feet above sea level to cross the continental divide. The watershed's forests act like a sponge, absorbing rain in the wet season, releasing it slowly in the dry, maintaining water levels crucial for both navigation and human consumption. Deforestation here doesn't just threaten wildlife, it threatens global commerce. The canal depends entirely on rainfall, on forests that create their own precipitation by releasing moisture that forms clouds that drop rain, that fills lakes, that lift ships. It's a system where cutting trees could literally stop world trade, where the fate of container ships depends on the health of howler monkeys' habitat, where global economics and rainforest ecology are inseparably intertwined in ways the canal's builders never imagined. The Darien Gap stretches for 60 miles between Panama and Colombia, the only break in the Pan-American Highway that otherwise runs from Alaska to Argentina. This roadless expanse of rainforest and swampland has resisted every attempt at connection, defeating engineers with its combination of political complexity and natural hostility. The gap preserves some of the most pristine rainforest in Central America, home to indigenous peoples who've lived here for millennia. Jungle so dense that GPS signals can't penetrate the canopy, rivers that rise 30 feet in hours, valleys that have never been mapped. The Darien remains one of the most impenetrable wilderness areas on Earth. The forest here grows on soil so poor that when cleared, it becomes useless within years, the nutrients existing not in Earth, but in the endless cycle of growth and decay. Harpy eagles, jaguars, and indigenous Embera and Wunan peoples share this space where time moves differently, where a journey of 60 miles can take weeks. The gap protects South America from diseases and invasive species, serves as a continental firebreak, a place where the modern world simply stops. Trinidad's Pitch Lake bubbles and oozes across 100 acres, the largest natural asphalt deposit in the world, a lake you can walk on except where fresh tar breaks through. The lake goes down 250 feet, though no one knows exactly how deep because instruments get stuck in the viscous depths. This isn't a lake in any conventional sense, but a slow-motion upwelling of oil and mud. Fossil fuels, returning to the surface after millions of years underground. The surface renews itself constantly, objects dropped on it disappearing within weeks, swallowed by the slow convection. Amerindians used this pitch to waterproof their canoes. Sir Walter Raleigh used it to caulk his ships, and today it paves roads around the world. The lake contains extremophile bacteria that shouldn't exist, organisms that thrive in toxic hydrocarbons, offering clues about how life might exist on other worlds. In some spots, the surface forms pools of rainwater where lotus flowers bloom, beauty growing from industrial ugliness. The lake breathes methane and sulfur, creates rainbow sheens on puddles, demonstrates that Earth can create lakes from substances other than water. The blue hole of Belize drops through Caribbean shallows like a pupil in an eye of turquoise, a perfectly circular sinkhole 1,000 feet across and 400 feet deep. This submarine sinkhole formed during ice ages when sea levels were lower, a cave system that developed in dry limestone, then drowned as oceans rose. Stalactites hang in the depths, formed when this was a cavern filled with air, now preserved in perpetual darkness, 140 feet underwater. The hole's walls are perfectly vertical, dropping through layers of ancient reef that record sea level changes over millennia. At 130 feet, there's a hydrogen sulfide layer where fresh and salt water meet, creating a toxic boundary that preserves everything below it, including the remains of sea turtles that ventured too deep and couldn't return. From above, the hole appears perfectly round, so geometrically precise it seems artificial. Sharks patrol the rim where deep blue meets shallow turquoise. The color change so abrupt, it looks like the ocean ends. It's a window into the Ice Age, a glimpse of the world that was, preserved in water so clear that divers descending into it feel like they're falling through sky. Jamaica's cockpit country spreads across 1,500 square kilometers of karst landscape, so rough it has never been fully mapped or settled. The limestone here has dissolved into thousands of conical hills and deep sinkholes, creating terrain that looks like an inverted egg carton from above. Between these hills, valleys trap moisture and create microclimates where endemic species evolved in isolation, plants and animals that exist in single valleys, nowhere else on Earth. The rocks are honeycombed with caves, underground rivers that appear and disappear, water that flows through darkness for miles before emerging in springs. The Maroons, escaped slaves, used this impenetrable landscape as refuge, developing a culture that persists today in villages accessible only on foot. Rain that falls here might take years to reach the sea, filtering through limestone that purifies it, emerging in springs that provide water for much of Jamaica. The landscape defies conventional mapping. GPS coordinates might put you at the bottom of a sinkhole or atop a tower of limestone, vertical distances as important as horizontal ones. The Mississippi River has changed course numerous times over millennia, leaving a trail of abandoned channels across its floodplain like a snake's shed skins. These oxbow lakes formed when the river cut off its own meanders, dot Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas, each one a ghost of where the river once ran. The river wants to change course again, would naturally flow down the Atchafalaya River's shorter path to the Gulf, but human engineering at the old river control structure forces it to maintain its current channel past New Orleans. The river carries 500 million tons of sediment annually, land from as far away as Montana, building and rebuilding its delta in a process that created much of Louisiana. During floods, the river runs backward in its tributaries, water flowing uphill as the main channel overwhelms everything around it. The riverbed near New Orleans lies above much of the city, held in place by levees, water flowing past at elevations higher than rooftops. It's a river that refuses to be controlled, that remembers every path it's ever taken, that continues to write and rewrite the geography of the continent's center. The New Madrid seismic zone in Missouri produced earthquakes in 1811 to 1812, so powerful they rang church bells in Boston, created waves on the Mississippi that flowed backward, and formed new lakes in Tennessee. This isn't where you'd expect major earthquakes. It's the middle of the continent, far from any plate boundary. Yet here, ancient faults buried beneath sediment, remnants from when North America tried to rift apart 750 million years ago, still slip and adjust. The earthquakes were felt over an area 10 times larger than the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the unconsolidated sediments of the Mississippi Valley transmitting seismic waves like jelly. Sand boils erupted across thousands of square miles, liquefied sand and water fountaining from the ground. Reelfoot Lake in Tennessee formed overnight when land dropped 20 feet. The zone remains active, producing thousands of small earthquakes annually, building toward another major event that scientists say is inevitable. It's a reminder that the continent's stable center is an illusion, that ancient wounds in the earth never fully heal. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky extends through limestone for over 420 miles of mapped passages, the world's longest known cave system, with new sections discovered every year. The cave began forming 10 million years ago as slightly acidic water dissolved limestone along fractures, creating passages that range from crawlways inches high to chambers that could hold football stadiums. The cave has 5 distinct levels, each representing a different epoch of the Green River's history as it cut deeper into the landscape. Native Americans explored the cave 4,000 years ago, their torch marks still visible on walls, their footprints preserved in mud that hasn't been disturbed since. They mined gypsum and mirability here, traveling miles underground with only reed torches for light. The cave breathes with barometric pressure changes, exhaling cool air in summer, inhaling in winter. Rivers still flow in the lowest levels, continuing the work of cave creation. Blind fish and cave shrimp have evolved here, creatures that have never known light, their ancestors trapped as passages flooded, adapting over millennia to permanent darkness. The Florida Everglades flows as a river 60 miles wide but only inches deep, moving so slowly it's nearly imperceptible, a sheet of water crawling toward the sea. This river of grass, as Marjorie Stoneman Douglas called it, is unique on Earth. Not quite land, not quite water, but something between. Water flows from Lake Okeechobee south through sawgrass marshes at a pace of about 100 feet per day, taking months to reach Florida Bay. The Everglades is the only place on Earth where alligators and crocodiles coexist naturally, where temperate and tropical species mingle, where salt and fresh water create gradients of life. The landscape appears flat, but contains ridges just inches higher that become islands of trees, creating the pattern of hammocks and sloughs that defines the ecosystem. Limestone beneath dissolves constantly, creating solution holes where alligators congregate in dry seasons, becoming keystone species by maintaining water holes that sustain all other life. The ecosystem depends on fire, lightning-sparked blazes that prevent trees from taking over, that release nutrients, that reset the succession clock. The Edwards Aquifer beneath Texas provides water for 2 million people through springs that have flowed for millennia, some discharging 200 million gallons per day. This isn't just groundwater, but an underground river system flowing through honeycombed limestone, moving as fast as surface streams in some places. The aquifer is artesian, water under pressure, that rises naturally through springs that Native Americans considered sacred. San Marcos. Springs maintains a constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, has never stopped flowing in recorded history, creates a river that begins fully formed. The aquifer's recharge zone, where surface water enters the system, is so direct that dye placed in certain creeks appears in springs 160 miles away within days. Blind catfish swim in the aquifer's depths, evolved in darkness, found nowhere else on Earth. The water is so pure it requires minimal treatment, filtered through miles of limestone that acts as nature's own purification system. But the aquifer is fragile. Pollution entering the recharge zone appears in springs. Droughts drop water levels precipitously, and increasing demand threatens springs that have flowed since the Pleistocene. The Ogallala Aquifer lies beneath 8 states of the Great Plains, holding 3 billion acre-feet of water deposited over millions of years, now being mined like a resource that won't renew. This underground sea, trapped in sand and gravel, laid down by rivers flowing from the Rocky Mountains, transformed the Great Plains from rangeland to America's breadbasket. But the water accumulated when the climate was wetter, when rivers that no longer exist spread sediment and water across the plains. Today's rainfall can't recharge what's being pumped. In some areas, water levels drop 5 feet per year. The aquifer isn't uniform, but varies in thickness from 200 feet to just inches, its distribution determining which areas thrive and which return to dry land. Wells that once hit water at 50 feet now go down 400 feet or run dry entirely. It's fossil water, some of it older than human civilization, being consumed in decades. The Ogallala demonstrates the illusion of abundance, how something vast can still be exhaustible, how the Great Plains agricultural miracle depends on ancient water that won't be replaced. Devil's Tower rises from the Wyoming prairie like a colossal tree stump, 867 feet of columnar basalt that formed when magma cooled underground 50 million years ago. The tower isn't volcanic, but intrusive, magma that never reached the surface, cooling slowly enough to form nearly perfect hexagonal columns, some 10 feet in diameter. Erosion stripped away softer surrounding rock, revealing this monument that shouldn't exist on the prairie. The columns formed as the magma contracted while cooling, creating joints that propagated downward, nature achieving geometric precision without design. Native Americans call it Bear Lodge, their stories telling of giant bears clawing the sides, creating the vertical grooves. The tower continues to erode, columns occasionally falling, the pile of broken columns at its base growing larger. Climbers find the cracks between columns perfect for ascent, following lines nature created through physics rather than intention. Prairie falcons nest on its walls, their cries echoing off rock that cooled when the Rocky Mountains were still rising, when Wyoming was tropical, when the world was fundamentally different. The Black Hills of South Dakota rise from the prairie like an island of mountains, dark with ponderosa pine that gives them their name. But these aren't hills. They're an exposed batholith, granite that cooled miles underground 1.8 billion years ago, pushed up and exposed by the same forces that created the Rocky Mountains. The hills are old, containing rocks 2.5 billion years old, some of the oldest exposed rocks in North America. Gold here formed when superheated water carried it through fractures in the granite, depositing it in veins that sparked the 1876 gold rush. The Homestake mine went down 8,000 feet, the deepest mine in North America, following gold deposits to depths where rock temperature reaches 134 degrees Fahrenheit. Now flooded and closed, the mine serves science, its deep chambers shielded from cosmic rays, perfect for detecting dark matter and neutrinos. The Black Hills create their own climate, catching moisture that would otherwise blow past, supporting forests in the middle of grassland, an ecological island where eastern and western species meet and sometimes hybridize into forms found nowhere else. The Badlands of South Dakota erode at 1 inch per year, a landscape disappearing before our eyes, revealing fossils constantly as ancient layers wear away. These rocks, laid down 75 to 28 million years ago, record the transformation of this region from seafloor to jungle, to savanna to badlands. Each layer tells a story. The yellow mounds formed under sea, the red layers in ancient jungles, the gray from volcanic ash that drifted from eruptions in the Great Basin. Fossils emerge daily, ancient horses the size of dogs, titanothers like prehistoric rhinoceroses, nimrovids that were neither quite cat nor dog. The erosion that reveals these treasures also destroys them, a race between discovery and disappearance. After rain, the Badlands smell of wet clay and ancient time, the bentonite clay swelling and becoming slippery as soap. In certain lights, the layers glow in shades of pink, yellow, and purple, a sunset preserved in stone. The landscape will be gone in 500,000 years, completely eroded away, a geological eye blink that happens to coincide with humanity's presence. Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota preserves multicolored badlands where the Little Missouri River carved through layers of ancient swamps and forests, exposing the Hell Creek Formation where Tyrannosaurus rex fossils emerge. These layers, 67 million years old, capture the last days of the dinosaurs, the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene, periods visible as an abrupt change in rock color. The park's painted canyons glow in horizontal stripes, coal seams that spontaneously ignited and baked surrounding clays into natural brick, creating red scoria that caps more easily eroded layers. These fires, some still burning underground, have been active for thousands of years, smoke occasionally rising from cracks in the earth. Prairie dogs here create towns covering hundreds of acres, their burrows aerating soil, their grazing maintaining grassland, their presence supporting predators from hawks to black-footed ferrets. The landscape continues to burn and erode, coal seams igniting when exposed to air, the Badlands retreating as the river cuts deeper, a landscape in constant flux that appears timeless but changes measurably within human lifetimes. The boundary waters between Minnesota and Ontario spreads across 1 million acres of lakes and forests, a liquid labyrinth where water is the dominant truth. Over 1,000 lakes connect through streams and portages in a pattern that seems designed by dreams rather than geology. This is the largest wilderness area east of the Rockies, where loons call across water so still it becomes sky, where moose wade through morning mist, where the only sounds are wind and water, and the ancient conversation between them. The lakes follow the grain of the Canadian Shield, filling depressions carved by glaciers, creating a landscape that's more water than land in places. Some lakes are vast, wind-whipped seas, others so small and hidden they have no names, known only to the ravens that watch from spruce trees. Voyageurs once paddled these waters carrying furs to market, following routes indigenous peoples had used for millennia. The waters are dark with tannins from bog drainage, the color of strong tea, yet clean enough to drink directly. In winter, the lakes become a different country, wolves crossing on ice roads that don't exist in summer, the boundary between nations meaningless to creatures that recognize only the older boundaries of season and sustenance. Michigan's Sleeping Bear Dunes advance inland at up to 4 feet per year, a slow-motion avalanche of sand that swallows forests and reveals them again decades later. These perched dunes, sitting 400 feet above Lake Michigan, migrate with the prevailing winds, burying trees that emerge years later as ghost forests, bleached and bare. The dunes are alive in ways that rock formations aren't, reshaping themselves with every storm, every season. Native legend tells of a mother bear and 2 cubs swimming across Lake Michigan to escape a Wisconsin forest fire, the exhausted cubs drowning just offshore, becoming the Manitou Islands, while the grieving mother became the dunes, still watching for her children. The sand here isn't local, but traveled from the Canadian Shield, carried by glaciers, sorted by waves, blown into dunes by wind, each grain a traveler from the north. In certain conditions, the dunes sing, a low humming created by sand grains sliding in harmony. Trees at the dune's edge lean away from the sand's advance, their growth rings recording years of struggle against burial. Eventually, they lose, disappear beneath the sand, but their children grow elsewhere, the forest retreating and advancing in a dance with the dunes that's been ongoing since the glaciers left. Niagara Falls retreats upstream about 1 foot per year, carving its way backward through bedrock, having already traveled 7 miles from where it began 12,000 years ago. The falls exist because of a caprock of hard dolomite overlying softer shale. The water erodes the shale, undermining the dolomite, which breaks off in building-sized chunks. This retreat has been carefully measured since the 1840s, the rate varying with water flow, now controlled by power generation that diverts half the river. At night, when tourist flow decreases, so does water flow, the falls throttled like a faucet for electricity generation. The original falls was a single cascade, but erosion has created the Horseshoe Falls and American Falls, with the Horseshoe Falls retreating faster because it carries 90% of the water. In winter, ice builds up at the base, creating temporary ice bridges that people once walked across until several deaths ended the practice. The mist creates its own microclimate, coating everything in ice in winter, supporting rare plants that normally grow much farther north. Eventually, in 50,000 years, the falls will retreat to Lake Erie and disappear, the Great Cataract becoming rapids, then memory, geological time erasing what seems eternal to human perception. Point Pelee in Ontario juts into Lake Erie like a finger pointing south, Canada's southernmost point, sharing latitude with Northern California. This peninsula exists because of longshore drift, sand carried by currents and deposited in a point that extends 20 kilometers into the lake. The point moves, shifts with storms, sometimes gaining land, sometimes losing it, a negotiation between land and water that never ends. During spring and fall migrations, millions of birds funnel through this peninsula, the shortest crossing of Lake Erie, creating one of North America's premier birdwatching locations. Monarch butterflies gather here in thousands before crossing the lake. Orange wings against blue water, an ancient navigation that predates human observation. The peninsula supports Carolinian forest, species that shouldn't exist this far north, sassafras, prickly pear cactus, plants that belong in Kentucky growing in Canada. The tip of the point changes shape daily, waves approaching from east and west, meeting at the apex, creating patterns in sand that last hours before being erased and rewritten. It's the edge of a nation, reaching toward a border defined by water, a peninsula that exists because currents and ice and time conspired to build land where there should be only lake. The Adirondack Mountains continue rising, pushed up 1 to 3 millimeters per year by a hotspot in Earth's mantle, mountains that refuse to accept their erosion. Unlike the Appalachians, which are eroding remnants of ancient peaks, the Adirondacks are actively growing, lifted by the same type of mantle plume that creates volcanic islands, though no volcanism occurs here. These mountains are a dome, a bubble in Earth's crust where hot mantle material rises but doesn't break through. The rocks here are among the oldest in North America, over 1 billion years old, but the mountains themselves are young, perhaps only 5 million years old as mountains. The uplift creates frequent small earthquakes, the crust adjusting to its slow rise. In the high peaks region, alpine plants grow that belong in the Arctic, remnants from the Ice Age that survive on summits that pierce above treeline. 46 peaks exceed 4,000 feet, each with its own character, its own approach, its own view of wilderness that extends to every horizon. The mountains are still rebounding from the weight of glaciers, still rising from forces below, a landscape in slow but constant motion, growing taller as you read these words, mountains that haven't finished becoming what they'll be. Mount Washington in New Hampshire hosts the worst weather in North America, a peak where Arctic and subtropical air masses collide with spectacular violence. In 1934, observers recorded a wind speed of 231 miles per hour, a surface wind record that stood for decades. The mountain creates its own weather, forcing air up its slopes so rapidly that clouds form instantly, wrapping the summit in fog 300 days per year. In winter, rime ice builds horizontally on structures, growing into the wind in formations that look like frozen explosions. The observatory at the summit is chained to the mountain, buildings designed to withstand hurricane-force winds that occur monthly. Temperature on the summit has ranged from 72 degrees to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, not counting wind chill that has reached -100. Despite being only 6,188 feet tall, Mount Washington experiences conditions similar to much higher peaks because of its position at the convergence of storm tracks. The mountain has killed more hikers than any other peak in North America, weather changing from benign to deadly in minutes. Yet on clear days, you can see the Atlantic Ocean, 5 states, and Canada, a view earned by surviving a mountain that treats every ascent as a test of preparation versus pride. The Connecticut River Valley preserves thousands of dinosaur footprints in sandstone, a library of movement written 200 million years ago. These aren't fossils in the traditional sense, but trace fossils, impressions left in mud that hardened to stone, preserving the actual steps of creatures that walked here when this valley was a tropical rift zone. Some trackways stretch for hundreds of feet, recording not just footsteps, but behavior, where dinosaurs ran, where they slowed, where groups traveled together. The tracks range from tiny prints of chicken-sized dinosaurs to impressions over 20 inches long from predators that stood 20 feet tall. At Dinosaur State Park in Connecticut, 2,000 tracks are preserved under a geodesic dome, but thousands more remain buried, protected for future study. The tracks were formed when the supercontinent Pangaea was breaking apart, when this valley was like today's East African Rift, when the Atlantic Ocean was just beginning to open. Native Americans knew about these tracks for centuries, incorporating them into their stories, recognizing them as bird tracks, which in a sense they were, birds being living dinosaurs. Every track is a moment preserved, a step taken on a specific day 200 million years ago, when a living creature walked across mud, never knowing its footprint would outlast its entire species. Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket exist as accidents of ice, terminal moraines left by glaciers 20,000 years ago, like forgotten luggage at the edge of the world. These islands are piles of sand, gravel, and boulders, debris scraped from New England and deposited here when the glaciers reached their southernmost point and melted. The islands are temporary, being steadily reclaimed by the Atlantic, losing several feet of shoreline annually to storms and currents. Yet they also grow in places, sand moving from eroding cliffs to building beaches, the islands reshaping themselves constantly. The glaciers left behind more than just debris. They left kettle ponds, depressions where massive ice chunks melted, now freshwater ponds surrounded by ocean. The island's isolation allowed unique ecosystems to develop, sandplain grasslands and coastal heathlands that exist nowhere else. Nantucket once supported a whaling fleet that hunted across all Earth's oceans, sailors navigating by stars from an island that itself navigates through time, moving and changing. Built from the remains of mountains that stood before humans existed, now home to species that evolved in the moment between ice ages, on islands that won't survive the next one. The Pine Barrens of New Jersey sprawl across 1 million acres, sitting atop an aquifer containing 17 trillion gallons of some of the purest water in the United States. This seems impossible. A wilderness in the most densely populated state. Pure water beneath acidic soil that supports primarily pine trees. The water is pure because the sandy soil filters it, because the tannic acids from pine needles and cedar swamps actually purify it, creating tea-colored streams that look polluted but are cleaner than most bottled water. The barrens aren't barren, but were named by farmers who couldn't grow traditional crops in the acidic, sandy soil. Instead, this ecosystem supports rare plants like orchids and carnivorous sundews, animals like the Pine Barrens tree frog found nowhere else. Fire maintains this ecosystem, with pitch pines that actually need fire to reproduce, their cones opening only in extreme heat. The forest has burned and regrown countless times, each fire resetting the succession, maintaining the pine dominance. Beneath it all flows the Cohansey Aquifer, water moving slowly through sand laid down when this was the bottom of an ancient sea, now emerging in streams that early industry used for bog iron, for glassmaking, for cranberry cultivation that continues today. Assateague Island migrates westward at about 20 feet per year, the Atlantic Ocean pushing sand from the ocean side to the bay side in a process called island rollover. This barrier island, stretching along Maryland and Virginia, isn't fighting the ocean, but dancing with it, moving and reshaping with every storm. Wild ponies, made famous by Marguerite Henry's Misty of Chincoteague, graze in salt marshes, descendants of horses that survived shipwrecks centuries ago, now perfectly adapted to drinking brackish water and eating beach grass. The island protects the mainland from storms while being destroyed and rebuilt by them, a sacrifice that repeats endlessly. Ghost forests stand in the surf, trees that grew on the bay side now on the ocean side as the island rolled over them. The island is really multiple environments: beach, dune, shrub zone, forest, and marsh, each moving westward in sequence. During nor'easters, the ocean cuts new inlets through the island, channels that might last decades or close within months. It's a landscape that demonstrates the fiction of fixed geography, showing that islands can walk, that maps become obsolete, that the boundary between land and sea is negotiation, not declaration. The New River in Appalachia flows north, one of the few major rivers to do so, and despite its name is one of the oldest rivers on Earth. The river predates the Appalachian Mountains by 250 million years, maintaining its course as the mountains rose around it, cutting down through rising rock like a saw through slowly lifting wood. The river's age is written in its course. It doesn't follow the logical path a young river would take, but maintains an ancient route established when the topography was completely different. The New River Gorge in West Virginia drops through 1,000 feet of rock layers, exposing coal seams that fueled America's Industrial Revolution, sandstones that hold impressions of ancient ferns, limestones full of sea creatures from when this was ocean floor. The river has cut so deep, it's created its own climate, the gorge bottom experiencing temperatures 10 degrees warmer than the rim. The name New comes from its relatively recent discovery by European explorers, ironic for a river that flowed before the Atlantic Ocean existed, before the continents took their current positions, a river older than most mountains, older than flowering plants, maintaining its course through geological epochs that saw the rise and fall of countless species. The Okefenokee Swamp spreads across 700 square miles of Georgia and Florida, a peat bog so vast it creates its own weather patterns. The swamp is actually higher than the surrounding land, a raised peat bog that accumulated over millennia, water flowing out in all directions like a shallow dome. The peat is 15 feet thick in places, compressed plant matter that occasionally breaks free and floats, creating floating islands that natives called trembling earth. These islands, some acres in size, support full-grown trees but undulate when walked upon, entire forests that drift slowly across open water. The swamp's dark water, stained black by tannic acid, mirrors cypress trees draped in Spanish moss so perfectly that up and down become confused. Alligators have worn trails through the peat that they've used for centuries, highways through the swamp that appear on no map. The swamp generates thunderstorms on summer afternoons, moisture rising from its vast surface to form clouds that drop rain back on the swamp. A hydrological cycle so localized you can watch water rise from swamp to sky to swamp again. It's one of the largest intact freshwater ecosystems in North America, a place where time moves at the pace of peat accumulation, where human presence remains temporary, where wilderness persists. The Mississippi River Delta loses a football field of land every hour, a disappearing act visible from space, Louisiana dissolving into the Gulf of Mexico. Since 1930, over 2,000 square miles have vanished, an area larger than Delaware gone beneath the waves. The land here was built by river sediment, layers of mud and sand deposited over 7,000 years as the Mississippi switched course like a garden hose, building land in one place while abandoning another. But now the river is confined by levees, its sediment shooting past the delta into deep water instead of building new land. Meanwhile, the existing land subsides, compressed by its own weight, by oil and gas extraction that removes supporting fluids, by the oxidation of organic matter exposed to air. Hurricanes accelerate the loss, storm surge pushing salt water deep into freshwater marshes, killing plants whose roots hold soil together. Entire communities have disappeared, shell middens where native peoples lived for millennia, fishing camps, even recent subdivisions, all gone beneath the water. The delta is reverting to open water, bays becoming sounds, becoming gulf, the boot of Louisiana losing its soul. Its geology at human timescale, fast enough that maps require yearly updates, that people can remember land where their grandparents lived now being open water. The Atchafalaya Basin in Louisiana would naturally capture the Mississippi River if not for the old river control structure, humanity's attempt to freeze a river that refuses to stop moving. The Atchafalaya offers the Mississippi a shorter, steeper path to the Gulf, and rivers always seek the steepest gradient. In the 1950s, the Mississippi was sending more water down the Atchafalaya each year, approaching a tipping point where it would abandon its current channel entirely. The control structure, completed in 1963, maintains a 70-30 split, forcing most of the Mississippi past New Orleans. But during the 1973 flood, the structure nearly failed, which would have redirected the entire river, leaving New Orleans on a salt wedge estuary, destroying drinking water supplies, stranding oil refineries and chemical plants. The basin itself is North America's largest river swamp, 1.4 million acres of wilderness, where black bears swim between islands, where ivory-billed woodpeckers might still exist, where cypress trees older than European presence in America stand in water that rises and falls with the river's breath. It's a parallel world to the controlled Mississippi, showing what the river would do if released, building new land at 30 square miles per year at its mouth, while the old delta disappears. Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas sits atop thermal springs, where water that fell as rain 4,400 years ago emerges at 143 degrees Fahrenheit. This isn't volcanic heat, but the warmth of depth, rainwater percolating down through fractures in the earth, descending 6,000 to 8,000 feet, where rocks are naturally hot, then rising rapidly through fault zones before it can cool. The water rises through Paleozoic sedimentary rocks, dissolving minerals that give it supposed healing properties that have attracted people for millennia. Native Americans called this neutral ground, where hostile tribes could gather peacefully at the springs. The Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto visited in 1541, finding elaborate Native American bathing facilities already ancient. The springs produce 700,000 gallons daily, flowing from 47 springs along the western slope of Hot Springs Mountain. The water contains no sulfur, unusual for hot springs, emerging clear and odorless. Before modern drilling, some springs were hot enough to cook eggs. The thermal waters have created unique ecosystems, blue-green algae that thrive in near-boiling water, creating colorful mats that paint the rocks in brilliant hues. It's one of Earth's natural spas, where the planet offers its heated groundwater to the surface, a gift from depth. The Ozark Plateau holds over 6,500 documented caves, more being discovered yearly, connected by underground streams that ignore state boundaries, creating a hidden landscape beneath the visible one. These caves, formed in limestone and dolomite, laid down when shallow seas covered the region 350 million years ago. The plateau is called a karst landscape, where water has dissolved rock to create not just caves, but sinkholes, springs, and losing streams that disappear underground for miles before re-emerging. Some caves breathe with barometric pressure, exhaling cool air in summer, inhaling in winter. Others maintain exact temperatures year-round, natural refrigerators that early settlers used for food storage. The caves connect in vast networks. Dye placed in a Missouri stream might emerge from an Arkansas spring days later and miles away. Blind cavefish, albino crayfish, and endangered bats evolved in this darkness, entire ecosystems that never see sunlight. The Ozarks demonstrate that solid ground is an illusion, that beneath our feet lies emptiness, decorated with flowstone and stalactites, rivers running in darkness, rooms that could hold cathedrals, a world inverted where solid and void switch places. Lake Champlain stretches between Vermont and New York with a deep trench plunging to 400 feet, carved by glaciers but never fully mapped, holding mysteries in its depth. The lake is 120 miles long but only 12 miles at its widest, a narrow slash of deep water that some call the Sixth Great Lake. The deepest parts remain unexplored, too dangerous for divers, too complex for simple sonar mapping. The lake has its own creature legend, Champ, supposedly a plesiosaur survivor, but more likely sturgeon that can grow 8 feet long and live over 100 years. The lake actually flows north, draining to the St. Lawrence River, part of a valley that was once an arm of the Atlantic Ocean when sea levels were higher. In winter, the lake creates ice formations called ice shoves, pressure ridges where expanding ice pushes up walls 30 feet high, grinding and groaning with sounds like thunder. The lake has seen Revolutionary War battles, its waters hiding shipwrecks from the 18th century, cannons and anchors preserved in cold darkness. During certain temperature conditions, the lake creates mirages, islands appearing to float above the water, opposite shores seeming to loom impossibly close. The physics of light bending over cold water, creating visions that confuse navigation. The channeled scablands of eastern Washington tell the story of the largest floods ever documented, catastrophes that reshaped the landscape in mere days 15,000 years ago. Ice dams holding glacial Lake Missoula failed repeatedly, releasing water volumes that dwarf imagination, 10 times the combined flow of all rivers on Earth today. These floods, moving at 65 miles per hour, carved channels hundreds of feet deep in solid basalt, created waterfalls that ran for only days, but left canyons, transported boulders the size of houses hundreds of miles. The floods happened perhaps 40 times as ice dams reformed and failed again, each flood lasting only days, but reshaping geography that should take millions of years to change. Dry Falls, once the world's largest waterfall at 3.5 miles wide and 400 feet high, now stands waterless, a ghost of catastrophe. Giant ripple marks, 50 feet high and 500 feet apart, corrugate the landscape like a giant's washboard. The scablands show that landscape isn't always shaped gradually. Sometimes it's carved in violence, in days of unimaginable force that leave scars visible from space, proof that Earth sometimes changes its mind suddenly and with devastating finality. Mount Shasta rises from Northern California in solitary grandeur, 10,000 feet from base to summit, possibly the largest volcano by volume in the Cascade chain. Unlike other Cascade peaks that are part of a range, Shasta stands alone, visible from 100 miles away, creating its own weather, its own mysteries. The mountain is actually multiple volcanoes, at least 4 overlapping cones built over 600,000 years. Shastina, a secondary cone on its western flank, is higher than most Cascade volcanoes in its own right. The mountain supports 7 named glaciers, more ice than all other Cascade volcanoes combined except Rainier. These glaciers feed springs that emerge fully formed from the mountain's base. The McCloud River beginning as a massive spring, flowing at 600 cubic feet per second. The mountain holds spiritual significance for dozens of tribes and New Age seekers who claim it houses everything from Lemurian civilizations to alien bases. What's certain is that it's still active, last erupting in 1786, its summit crater still warm, fumaroles still venting steam. The mountain is so massive it creates lenticular clouds, disc-shaped formations that hover near the summit and look remarkably like flying saucers, adding to its mystique. The Salton Sea sprawls across the California desert, a mistake that became an ecosystem, created by accident in 1905 when irrigation canals from the Colorado River breached. For 2 years, the entire flow of the Colorado poured into the Salton Sink, creating California's largest lake in its driest desert. The sea has no outlet, becoming saltier each year as water evaporates and salts concentrate, now 50% saltier than the Pacific Ocean. The lake has died and been reborn multiple times. It was dry in 1900, full by 1907, and is now shrinking again, leaving behind salt flats that create toxic dust storms. Yet for decades it was a resort destination, with yacht clubs and beach towns, Frank Sinatra and the Beach Boys performing on its shores. Now, those towns are mostly abandoned, salt-corroded ruins in 120-degree heat. Despite its toxicity, the sea supports millions of birds on the Pacific Flyway, one of the few wetlands remaining in a region that's lost 95% of them. Fish populations boom and bust in massive die-offs that leave beaches covered in rotting tilapia. It's an accidental ocean in the desert, dying as it was born, a testament to how human error can create landscapes that nature never intended. Channel Islands off California were once a single landmass called Santa Rosa, home to pygmy mammoths that stood only 6 feet tall, miniature elephants that evolved in isolation until 13,000 years ago. During ice ages, when sea levels were 400 feet lower, the 4 northern islands formed one super island, close enough to the mainland that Columbian mammoths could swim the 4-mile channel. Once there, with limited food resources, natural selection favored smaller individuals, and over thousands of years, mammoths shrank to the size of large cattle. These pygmy mammoths shared the island with giant mice and tiny foxes. Evolution, running experiments in size that seem borrowed from fairy tales. The islands rose and fell with sea levels, drowning and emerging, each time reshaping life that survived. Today, island foxes found nowhere else are recovering from near extinction. Plants exist that grow on single islands, and archaeological sites reveal the Chumash people navigated between islands in plank canoes for 13,000 years. The cold California current meets warm southern waters here, creating upwelling that supports kelp forests, sea lions, and blue whales. The islands are North America's Galapagos, close enough to see from shore, but isolated enough to create their own evolutionary stories. The lost coast of California runs for 80 miles, where Highway 1 had to turn inland, defeated by terrain so rugged that it remains California's only undeveloped coastline. The coast earned its name because it stayed lost to development, the King Range rising 4,000 feet from the ocean in less than 3 miles, creating slopes too steep for roads. This is where 3 tectonic plates meet, the Pacific, North American, and Gorda, creating the most seismically active region in the continental United States. Earthquakes are constant, the land rising measurably, marine terraces stepping up hillsides showing ancient sea levels. Black sand beaches stretch between headlands, sand made from crushed, dark rocks rather than the usual quartz. Roosevelt Elk wander beaches where no trails exist, where rogue waves can sweep 100 feet inland, where the wind never stops. Abandoned settlements dot the coast, dreams defeated by isolation and storms. The Mattole River meets the ocean here, one of the last undammed rivers in California, where salmon still run as they have since the ice ages. It's a coast that refuses civilization, where nature maintains sovereignty through sheer geographic hostility, where the edge of the continent remains as wild as when only indigenous peoples knew its secrets. Yellowstone sits atop a supervolcano with a magma chamber 37 miles long and 18 miles wide, starting just 3 miles below the surface, so vast that the entire park is essentially inside the volcano. This isn't a mountain that might erupt, but a vast caldera, a depression left from an eruption 640,000 years ago that ejected 240 cubic miles of material, covering half of North America, in ash. The ground rises and falls measurably. The floor of the caldera rose 3 feet between 2004 and 2010, then stopped, the magma chamber breathing. The volcano powers over 10,000 thermal features, more geysers, hot springs, and fumaroles than the rest of Earth combined. The heat beneath creates its own chemistry, supporting bacteria that thrive in boiling water, organisms that paint hot springs in rainbow colors, life that shouldn't exist but does. The volcano has erupted 3 times in the last 2 million years, roughly every 600,000 to 800,000 years, leading some to call it overdue, though volcanoes don't follow schedules. For now, it sleeps fitfully, its heat escaping through geysers and springs, the largest volcanic system on the continent expressing itself in beauty, rather than violence, though the potential for catastrophe underlies every bubbling pool. The Great Salt Lake spreads across northern Utah, up to 9 times saltier than the ocean, the remnant of ancient Lake Bonneville that once covered 20,000 square miles. This prehistoric lake was 1,000 feet deep, held back by natural dams that catastrophically failed 4,500 years ago, releasing floods that carved channels visible from space. Today's lake is all that remains, a shallow, hypersaline puddle averaging only 14 feet deep. The lake's salinity varies dramatically. The north arm, cut off by a railroad causeway, reaches saturation, precipitating salt that falls like snow through pink water colored by halophilic bacteria. Brine shrimp, by the trillions, feed millions of migrating birds, creating one of the Western Hemisphere's most important shorebird habitats. The lake has no outlet, its level determined entirely by the balance between inflow and evaporation, rising and falling dramatically. Ranches underwater one decade become salt flats the next. Salt industries extract minerals worth millions, while brine flies form living carpets on shores, so dense that walking creates waves and insect seas. The lake is dying now, reaching historic lows as upstream water is diverted, exposing lake bed that becomes toxic dust, the remnant of an ice age ocean disappearing into desert air. Bryce Canyon's hoodoos stand like armies of stone sentinels, eroding at 2 to 4 feet every century, the entire amphitheater destined to disappear in 3 million years. These aren't true canyons, but natural amphitheaters carved into the Ponsaugunt Plateau's edge, where erosion creates spires, windows, and bridges from layers of limestone, sandstone, and mudstone. The rocks formed in a vast lake 50 million years ago, each layer recording different depths and conditions, creating the reds, whites, and oranges that glow at sunrise. Frost wedging does most of the work. Water freezing in cracks 200 nights per year, expanding and breaking rock grain by grain. The hoodoos have names and stories: Thor's hammer, the 3 wise men, Queen Victoria, human pattern seeking finding familiar forms in random erosion. From the rim, the amphitheaters seem frozen, but time-lapse photography reveals constant rockfall, spires collapsing, new ones emerging from cliffs. The elevation, 8,000 to 9,000 feet, creates snow that lingers into June, white caps on red rocks, a landscape that seems Martian, but for the ponderosa pines that somehow grow from solid rock. Each hoodoo is temporary, a moment in stone's journey from plateau to valley floor, erosion creating art that exists only briefly in geological time. The Flint Hills of Kansas and Oklahoma preserve the last 4% of the tallgrass prairie that once covered 170 million acres of North America. This sea of grass, surviving only because limestone so near the surface made the land unsuitable for plowing, shows what much of the continent's center once looked like. Grasses here grow 8 feet tall, their roots reaching 15 feet deep, creating more biomass below ground than above. Fire maintains this ecosystem. Without burning every few years, trees would invade, ending the prairie. Lightning once provided the fire, now ranchers burn deliberately, the hills glowing orange in spring nights as ancient rhythms continue. Bison that once numbered in millions are gone, but cattle now fill their ecological role, grazing patterns creating diversity. The prairie changes color through seasons: emerald in spring, bronze in summer, rust in fall, silver in winter when ice coats every stem. Wind moves through grass in waves that look like ocean swells, the similarity so strong that early settlers reported seasickness. Over 200 bird species use these grasslands, some flying from Argentina to nest in grass that their ancestors have known for millennia. It's a landscape that seems empty, but teems with life, most of it hidden, underground, or too small to see, without lying belly down in grass. that whispers stories older than any forest. The Nebraska sandhills cover 20,000 square miles, the largest dune system in the Western Hemisphere, now stabilized by grass that transformed desert into rangeland. These dunes formed 8,000 to 15,000 years ago, when the region was much drier, sand blowing from dried riverbeds into dunes 400 feet tall. When climate shifted wetter, grasses colonized the sand, their roots holding it in place, creating a landscape unique on Earth. Sand dunes covered in prairie. Beneath lies the Ogallala Aquifer, and where dunes intersect the water table, thousands of shallow lakes appear, azure eyes in golden grass. The lakes are ephemeral, appearing and disappearing with rainfall, some lasting decades, others just seasons. Sandhill cranes stop here during migration. 500,000 birds staging on the Platte River before dispersing across the sandhills, their calls echoing across grass-covered dunes. The region is so sparsely populated that it's one of the darkest places in America. The Milky Way brilliant overhead, stars reflecting in temporary lakes. Ranches here can span 50,000 acres, necessary because the sandy soil supports fewer cattle than richer ground. It's a landscape that shouldn't exist. Sand dunes that became prairie, desert that holds water, a sea of grass waves frozen in sand beneath. The Red River between Texas and Oklahoma runs red with salt and sediment, flowing through 250-million-year-old salt deposits that make its water too saline for most uses. The salt comes from Permian seas that evaporated repeatedly, leaving salt beds thousands of feet thick, now dissolved by the river grain by grain. The river forms the border between states, but rivers move, creating jurisdiction disputes as meanders cut off, leaving pieces of Texas in Oklahoma and vice versa. During droughts, salt concentration increases until the water can kill crops if used for irrigation. Salt springs feed the river, some so concentrated they were mined by Native Americans, who traded salt across the continent. The riverbed itself shifts constantly, quicksand common where water saturates sand, cattle and horses lost to what looked like solid ground. Tornado Alley crosses the river valley, where warm, moist air from the Gulf meets cold, dry air from Canada, creating supercells that spawn the most violent tornadoes on Earth. The Red River has run backward during massive floods on the Mississippi, salt water flowing upstream for days. It's a river that defies expectations, undrinkable water in a region that desperately needs water, a boundary that won't stay put, red water in a landscape that burns brown and gold. Cadillac Mountain in Maine's Acadia National Park catches America's first sunrise from October through March, the first place in the United States to see the new day. At only 1,530 feet, it's not tall by mountain standards, but its position on Mount Desert Island, jutting into the Atlantic, gives it this temporal distinction. The mountain is pink granite, formed 420 million years ago when North America collided with Europe, creating Pangaea. Glaciers sculpted its dome shape, carving striations still visible in the granite, compass needles for ice that flowed toward the sea. The summit supports subalpine plants usually found much farther north or at higher elevations, Arctic refugees that survived here when ice retreated. From October to March, people gather before dawn to witness first light touching America, though the exact spot changes daily with Earth's tilt. The mountain was originally named Green Mountain until 1918, renamed for the Cadillac family whose genealogy traced to the French explorer who founded Detroit. On clear days, you can see 60 miles of coastline, dozens of islands, and sometimes the mountains of New Hampshire. Peregrine falcons nest on its cliffs, restored after DDT nearly eliminated them, now diving at 200 miles per hour, past hikers who came to see sunrise. The St. Lawrence River system drains 25% of the world's freshwater reserves, carrying the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean through a valley that was once an ocean itself. The river begins at Lake Ontario and flows 744 miles to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but it's really the final section of a drainage system that reaches to Minnesota, collecting water from 300,000 square miles. The Thousand Islands, actually 1,164 islands, dot the river where it leaves Lake Ontario. Granite knobs scoured by glaciers, some large enough for castles, others just rocks with a single tree. The river reverses direction twice daily near its mouth, tides from the Atlantic pushing saltwater 100 miles upstream, creating brackish zones where freshwater fish meet ocean species. Whales follow the salt wedge inland, belugas, minke, sometimes blue whales entering the river, the largest animals on Earth swimming in what maps call a river. Ice roads form in winter, where the current slows, trucks driving where ships sail in summer. The river created the landscape of eastern North America, its ancestors carving valleys when sea levels were lower. When the river reached the edge of the continental shelf, a freshwater torrent entering the ocean where now there's only seafloor. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge spans 19.3 million acres in Alaska, roughly the size of South Carolina, with no roads, no trails, no human infrastructure, except a few research stations. The refuge extends from the Arctic Ocean to the Brooks Range, encompassing the calving grounds of the porcupine caribou herd, 200,000 animals that migrate here each summer in one of Earth's last great migrations. The coastal plain, just 1,500 square miles, concentrates more wildlife than seems possible in the Arctic. Muskoxen, wolves, all 3 species of North American bears, millions of birds from 6 continents. In summer, the sun doesn't set for 2 months, creating an explosion of life as the tundra transforms from white to green to gold. Permafrost underlies everything, ground frozen for thousands of years, now thawing and releasing methane, creating thermokarst lakes that appear and drain unpredictably. The refuge holds oil reserves that create constant political tension between preservation and extraction. Rivers here run north to the Arctic Ocean, their deltas creating wetlands where snow geese nest by the millions. It's the largest protected wilderness in America, a place where you can walk for weeks without seeing another human, where the horizon holds only mountains and tundra and the infinite variations of light on snow. Death Valley's racetrack playa features rocks that slide across the desert floor by themselves, leaving trails hundreds of feet long, a mystery solved only in 2014. The rocks, some weighing 700 pounds, move across the flat, dry lake bed, leaving tracks that persist for years. Scientists discovered the rocks move when rare winter rains create shallow ponds that freeze on cold nights, forming sheets of ice just millimeters thick. When sun warms the ice, it breaks into panels that wind pushes, the ice sheets acting like sails that push rocks across the slippery mud beneath. The movement happens rarely, requires exact conditions, rain, freezing temperatures, sun and wind in perfect sequence. Some trails are straight, others curve, some rocks move together, others diverge, creating patterns that seem intentional but result from wind and ice and chance. The playa itself is almost perfectly flat, varying only 2 inches across its 3-mile length, smoother than many human-made surfaces. When dry, the mud cracks into polygons, a natural tiling that looks designed. The moving rocks weren't photographed in motion until 2014, their secret kept for decades, reminding us that Earth still holds mysteries, still has phenomena that science hasn't explained. The Brooks Range extends 700 miles across Alaska, mountains so remote that some valleys have never been formally surveyed, places that appear on no detailed map. The range forms the northernmost extension of the Rocky Mountains, though separated by lowlands, a wall between the Arctic Ocean and interior Alaska. No roads cross the range for 600 miles. The Dalton Highway, the only breach in a barrier otherwise crossed only on foot or by small plane. The mountains aren't particularly tall. The highest peak reaches only 8,976 feet, but they rise from near sea level, creating dramatic relief. Glaciers carved U-shaped valleys that channel caribou migrations, the same routes used for 10,000 years. In winter, temperatures reach -60 Fahrenheit, cold enough that exposed skin freezes in minutes. That breath crystallizes and falls as ice dust. Summer brings mosquitoes in clouds thick enough to suffocate caribou calves, one of the densest concentrations of biting insects on Earth. The rocks here include some 400 million years old, formed in tropical seas when this land was at the equator. Now they're frozen most of the year. Mountains that traveled from tropics to Arctic, carrying fossils of coral and warm water creatures to a place where only the hardiest life survives. Lake Okeechobee spreads across 730 square miles of South Florida, yet averages only 9 feet deep, more like a vast shallow dish than a traditional lake. The lake is so shallow and broad that wind can push all the water to one side, exposing miles of lake bottom on the other, a phenomenon called a seiche. The Seminole name means big water, and from its center, no land is visible, just water meeting sky in all directions. The lake is the liquid heart of the Everglades system, overflow once spilling south to create the River of Grass, now controlled by levees and canals. Hurricane winds can push the entire lake overland. In 1928, a hurricane drove the lake over its south shore, drowning 2,500 people in one of America's deadliest natural disasters. The lake bottom is muck, organic matter accumulated over millennia, so rich it's mined for potting soil, so soft that walking on exposed bottom is impossible. Algae blooms now plague the lake, fed by agricultural runoff, turning water green as paint, sometimes toxic. Yet it remains vital habitat, supporting alligators, vast bird colonies, and the last wild breeding population of Everglades snail kites. It's a lake that acts more like weather than water, responding to wind and pressure, moving across the landscape, refusing confinement. Chesapeake Bay exists because of a bolide impact 35 million years ago, a meteor or comet that struck near what's now Virginia, creating a crater 55 miles wide, now buried beneath the bay. The impact crater influenced the course of rivers, creating the convergence that became the bay when sea levels rose after the Ice Age. The bay is the largest estuary in the United States, where fresh water from 150 rivers mixes with Atlantic saltwater, creating gradients of salinity that support extraordinary diversity. Oysters once filtered the entire bay's water in 3 days. Now, reduced to 1% of historic levels, it takes a year. The bay is surprisingly shallow, averaging only 21 feet, with a narrow channel 174 feet deep carved by the ancient Susquehanna River when sea levels were lower. Blue crabs migrate within the bay, following salt gradients, spawning in salt water, growing in brackish marshes. The bay breathes with the tides, its water completely exchanging with the ocean every 180 days. In summer, deep waters lose oxygen, creating dead zones where nothing can survive, areas expanding with nutrient pollution. The bay remembers its violent birth in its shape, rivers converging toward the buried crater, life flourishing where cosmic violence once sterilized everything. Mount Rushmore is carved into rock, formed 1.6 billion years ago, among the oldest exposed granite in North America, stone that existed before complex life evolved. The Black Hills granite formed deep underground when North America was still assembling, cooled slowly enough to form large crystals that sparkle in sunlight. The mountain was known to Lakota as 6 grandfathers before its carving, and the granite itself tells stories older than any culture. The rock is so hard that conventional tools failed. Workers used dynamite to remove 450,000 tons of rock, controlled explosions that could remove stone to within inches of the final surface. The carved faces are 60 feet tall, but erosion touches them too. The granite erodes at 1 inch per 10,000 years, meaning the faces will last 7 million years. Water seeps into cracks, freezes, expands, slowly breaking the stone that seems eternal. The monument created its own ecosystem. Turkey vultures nest in Lincoln's Ear, rock wrens in Washington's Wig. Behind the faces, a hall of records was begun but never finished, a cave that was to hold America's founding documents, now sealed, a time capsule in billion-year-old rock. The Appalachian Trail winds 2,190 miles from Georgia to Maine, crossing ridgelines that once towered higher than the Himalayas, now worn to gentle curves by 480 million years of erosion. The trail crosses through 14 states, ascending and descending elevation changes that total 464,500 feet, equivalent to climbing Mount Everest 16 times from sea level. Every step crosses rock layers that record the assembly and breakup of supercontinents, the opening and closing of oceans, the rise and fall of mountain chains that preceded these mountains. The trail follows ridges that form the eastern continental divide in places, where a raindrop's fall determines whether it flows to the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico. Through hikers take 5 million steps to complete the trail, wearing through multiple pairs of boots, crossing ecosystems from southern hardwood forests to alpine tundra. The trail passes through wilderness and cities, crosses roads 55 times, yet maintains a corridor of wildness that harbors black bears, timber rattlesnakes, and the returning howl of coyotes. It's a human-made line through ancient geology, a walk through deep time measured in human steps, where every mile represents millions of years of Earth's story. Old Faithful erupts every 44 to 125 minutes, a reliability that has persisted for at least 300 years according to historical records, likely far longer according to geological evidence. The geyser works like a pressure cooker. Water at depth reaches 400 degrees Fahrenheit, but can't boil due to pressure from water above. When enough steam bubbles form, they push water out the top, reducing pressure below, causing explosive boiling that launches water 180 feet high. Each eruption expels 3,700 to 8,400 gallons of water, the variation determining the interval until the next eruption. Larger eruptions require longer recovery. The geyser's plumbing extends at least 72 feet down through silica-cemented gravels, a natural pipe that focuses eruptions. Earthquakes have changed Old Faithful's behavior. The 1959 Hebgen Lake earthquake lengthened its intervals. The 1983 Bora Peak earthquake shortened them. The water erupting today fell as snow and rain on the Yellowstone Plateau decades ago, percolating through rock, heating in chambers warmed by magma, waiting its turn to fly. It's Earth performing on schedule, a planetary clockwork that runs on heat and water and time, reliable as sunrise in a world where little else is. The Arctic Ocean's Lomonosov Ridge stretches 1,100 miles from Siberia to Greenland, an underwater mountain range that might hold 25% of the world's undiscovered oil beneath ice 10 feet thick. The ridge rises 10,000 feet from the ocean floor, its peak still 3,000 feet below the surface, mountains hidden beneath the least explored ocean on Earth. 5 nations claim portions of the ridge, their claims overlapping, creating potential conflict over resources that climate change is making accessible. The ridge splits the Arctic Ocean into two major basins, influencing deep water circulation that affects global climate. Core samples from the ridge reveal it was once above water, covered in forests 55 million years ago, when the Arctic was tropical. Now it's capped by sea ice that forms and melts seasonally, though that ice is thinning, disappearing earlier, forming later. Beneath the ice, the ridge hosts ecosystems never seen by human eyes, species that might be unique, adapted to permanent cold and darkness. It's a mountain range that belongs to no one and everyone, hidden beneath ice that won't last, holding oil that formed when the Arctic was warm, a reminder that Earth's climate has shifted dramatically before. Point Barrow, Alaska, the northernmost point of the United States, experiences 85 days when the sun never rises and 82 days when it never sets. At 71 degrees north, it's where the continent runs out, where land meets the Arctic Ocean in a gravel spit that shifts with every storm. The point has been inhabited for 1,500 years by Inupiat peoples who learned to survive where winter temperatures reach -56 Fahrenheit, with winds that push the cold through any clothing. In winter darkness, only stars and aurora provide natural light, green curtains dancing over ice that extends to the horizon. When the sun returns in late January, it skims along the horizon, neither rising nor setting properly, confused by latitude. In summer, the sun circles the sky, shadows rotating full circle, plants growing continuously in light that never ends. Sea ice that once remained year-round now disappears in summer, the ocean open where elders remember only ice. Polar bears hunt here where currents concentrate seals, where three seas meet, Beaufort, Chukchi, and Arctic proper. It's the edge of the nation, a place that exists at the boundary of what's possible, where people have lived for millennia, at the intersection of land, ice, and sea, proving that humans can adapt to anything. As we reach the end of tonight's journey across North America, we've traveled from ancient mountain cores to young volcanic peaks, from Arctic ice to Caribbean waters, from crystals growing silently in Mexican caves to winds howling across New Hampshire summits. We've witnessed a continent that breathes with the seasons, that rises and falls with tides both liquid and geological, where time moves at 1,000 different speeds simultaneously. Each fact we've explored tonight exists right now. The Athabasca Dunes are shifting grain by grain as you drift toward sleep. The Mississippi is carrying its ancient burden toward the Gulf. And deep beneath Yellowstone, that vast chamber of magma pulses with Earth's patient heartbeat. The San Andreas Fault has moved imperceptibly while you've listened. Niagara Falls has retreated by microscopic amounts. Another few acres of Louisiana have slipped beneath the waves. Geography never sleeps, but you should. May these wonders of North America accompany you into peaceful dreams, where perhaps you'll walk on Mantle Rock in Newfoundland or float in the pure waters of Crater Lake. The continent will continue its slow dance through the night, mountains rising imperceptibly, rivers carving their courses, crystals growing in the darkness. Tomorrow, all these places will still be there, still changing, still holding their secrets. But for tonight, let them hold your thoughts as you drift into sleep, carried by the knowledge that you rest on a continent of wonders, where every stone has a story, every river knows the sea, and every mountain remembers when it was the ocean floor. Rest well, knowing that the earth continues its patient work while you sleep. Good night.